So the following podcast comes from the Embodiment Conference about 2 years ago now. So it was a really great conference, by far the biggest of its kind, 1,000 speakers, about 500,000 people attending. It was at a really delicate time with COVID and various other things happening in the world. And we just think it was a huge gift to the world. The whole team worked incredibly hard to put the conference on. We've decided that it's really good to share some of the sessions from the conference to everyone. So we put a few of them out on a podcast. So here's one of those. So if you hear references, sound like every day, that's where it's from. And we think the content still really stands up. So enjoy this session.
Hi, I'm Gil Hedley, and I'm the proud sponsor of the Anatomy and Movement channel. Welcome. This conference is important. It's both groundbreaking and ground building. Literally hundreds of thousands of us have gathered here to expand our experience of embodiment, and in so doing, evolve the embodied experience of our world. Embodiment is a practice that anchors us consciously into that which is common to us all, our human body. Regardless of our differences, and we have them, we all live out our lives in a body, and we're all connected by that shared experience. I've been developing integral anatomy for the past 25 years. I believe the human body is not a problem to be solved, but rather a gift to be received and explored. Integral anatomy is an approach to understanding the whole body, which emphasizes textural layers, continuities, and relationships. We notice differences not to create separation, but to appreciate that which unites us all. So this is an embodiment conference, right? So I'm doing the embodiment version of my stuff, and would like to just start with a big out breath, maybe 3 of them, not at the same time, but in a row. Okay. Now that was like 15 staccato breaths I just heard. So yeah, so let's go. Just blow it out. Blow it out. Now don't breathe in; it'll just happen automatically. And then blow another one out. And then take the free rebound. Free rebound. It's that simple to create just a little bit of coherence amongst us. So thanks for breathing with me and each other. Yeah. So I tend to think of embodiment as just being present, consciously aware of what there is to be aware of. So I don't immediately say the body, because we can be larger than our bodies. And if we're wanting to be conscious of our bodies, then we can become aware there. So I spent a long time not being aware of my body, being an intellectual in grad school, floating outside of my body. That was a nice place to be, in the stratosphere of mental activity. And having done that for a while, it got to be like, how do I get into this thing? I had a very alienated relationship with my body. How do I get into this thing? I was kind of mad at it, actually. It's kind of bothering me all the time, getting in the way. So I started practicing Tai Chi. I started learning acupressure massage in my Tai Chi classes. I started to move in a way other than a monk reading a book. And that made me aware of how much pain I was in. That was the first thing I learned. Whoa, it's horrible in here. What a mess. Because if you just spend years and years sitting at a desk reading, nowadays people spend years and years sitting at a computer typing or bent over a phone. Right? So I spent years and years sitting at a desk reading a book. And it takes a toll on your body and your emotional life. So starting to learn massage and get a little feel for things brought me more deeply in. And that took me to the study of anatomy, to training as a massage therapist, training as a rolfer. certified in that, and brought me to the dissection lab, brought me into personal relationships that engaged my body. And 25, 30 years later, it's a different experience. And I've learned a lot in the laboratory, which is where I decided I would kind of plunk down my energy to go deeply in. And there were so many surprises in there, particularly the fascia. Approaching a dissection as a Rolfer, you get into fascia. So Rolfers think they're working on fascia. They are working on fascia. But that focus brings consciousness to that layer when they touch. And maybe I didn't pay so much attention to some other things. So when I started doing dissection, I started realizing, oh, there's not just fascia in the body, there's everything. And when I mean everything, like the whole universe. I read a wonderful book, I think it was Michael Talbot, The Holographic Universe. And it's kind of that, it's way beyond as above, so below. It's like literally in this atom is the universe, in this molecule is the universe. And you can scale that up to any proportion. So for me, my playground, as it were, is the human form. And I'd like to talk for the next few minutes about fascia. You like to hear about fascia. I call the talk, What's the Fuzz? I really should have called it Embodying Your Fascia in Movement, which is but the hook is the fuzz thing because everyone associates that with me. But it's not really the first layer. And as you're going in, of course, we have our skin. We can feel ourselves beyond our skin. But first encounter I had with fascia was really this very first superficial layer. We call it superficial fascia. Fascia just means the tissues that kind of, you can cut them into sheets and they wrap around stuff. That's the quick definition of that for at-home version. So in the laboratory, reflecting this first beautiful layer of skin, you come to superficial fascia. It is a big yellow layer. We're all yellow underneath, it turns out. Doesn't matter what your surface coloration is. There's no absolutes in surface coloration. If you've noticed, you'd need a palette of many colors to paint a person. And you'd need a palette of many yellows to paint the superficial fascia. There's all manner of yellow. But to say these things is one thing, and to feel it is another. But having witnessed the entire superficial fascia literally hundreds of times through the dissection process, I've come to a transformed relationship starting with that layer. How do you get into something that's rejected by your culture? How do you get into something that's in the dissection lab, generally put into the bucket, literally, so you can go do the cool stuff that's on the test, or that's famous, or that's named? And yet there's this exquisite fleece covering our whole body. Now, if you're doing regional dissection, you'd never really notice its continuity, its beauty, its texture, right? Over the regions, you would never notice that. But if you do what I call integral anatomy, where you kind of go layer by layer, texture by texture, like through the strata of the human form, like an archaeologist, when you encounter this beautiful yellow fleece covering your body, people are usually shocked. I was shocked. Like, what's that? Where'd that come from? I usually do my talks with pictures, but I chose specifically not to do this talk with pictures. We can develop a picture of our insides by feeling rather than by slideshow. So picture this, and don't be shy. Wherever you've got it, touch it. Right? We have some soft stuff underneath our skin. If you make a muscle, right? And you make a muscle. Most of us are not ripped like Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was 20. Some of us are, but I'm not. So you go like this, and then you go touch, and you touch wherever you touch, and there's this kind of like boing, boing. There's a little spongy layer there. So you feel your skin, But instead of going this way, go straight down, and there's buoyancy. It kind of bounces back at you a little bit. Wherever you touch, this layer covers your whole body. So if you touch your thigh, just feel you're at the skin, and then just push in a little bit, and then let it kind of push you out, kind of like that out breath we did, kind of like pushes it back open. Well, the superficial fascia has that kind of buoyancy. It's a fatty layer, it floats, right? It's why we can float in the pool. Fill your lungs up and your superficial fascia together, and you're like a floaty mattress in the pool. So if we touch this layer, and sometimes you're like, I don't want to touch it. I got too many inches. I used to have no inches, and now I got like 3. I used to be like a pinch an inch. It's not like pinch a whatever. And some of y'all might pinch a foot, whatever. Lots of people, our bodies have very different shapes, but our superficial fascia is shared, right? So superficial fascia here, and how can we maybe feeling that buoyancy? Now, if you're not using your hands to feel it, can you connect in a feeling state, go like with your mind just beneath your skin and feel this semi-fluid matrix of connective tissue that's lit up like the sun with energy. And that is a tremendous blessing to your life, whether you know it or not. Now, why would we consider such a thing a blessing to our life? This is a giant endocrine organ that we wear on the surface of our bodies. It's in communication with your pancreas. And one is saying, burn fat, store fat, and the other is saying, okay, burn fat, store fat. And they talk to each other all day long, communicating about your resources. Many of us are struggling at this time with our resources, right? We're thinking, I don't have enough resources. I lost my job. I'm going to a free conference because I can't go to the paid conference. I'm watching all the stuff that I can before the 48 hours is up. Oh my gosh, I don't have enough. I don't have enough. I don't have enough. We say that to ourselves all the time. But if you embody your superficial fascia, you'll find there's actually some intrinsic resources, which if you accept those intrinsic resources, then extrinsic resources might be also more accessible. But when you reject your very own resource, how can you expect to come upon resources otherwise? And resources come in many forms, not only bling, it's not only cash, right? Resources come in the form of relationships, right? Which are much easier to come upon when you're not self-hating, right? Resources come in the form of your very connection, right? Connectedness is contagious, as surely as a sense of want. So when we connect to our superficial fascia, if you dare to, and appreciate it as a part of your metabolic processes where you manage your resources, you might be not so offended by the layer when you come upon it. What else is going on there? Comfort, right? We embody our sensuality in this layer as much as anywhere else. We love to snuggle one another's superficial fascia. Is it not true? And when the mama is growing the little ones inside of her, she grows superficial fascia on the surface of her body, and it's actually not only the comfy place where a baby can rest, the comfy place where baby can be nourished, right? The breasts are a specialty function within the superficial fascia layer. So our connecting into that layer is connecting into our own capacity to nourish another, to embrace another, to enjoy that essential aspect of our body. And maybe we avoid it because we're sometimes afraid of connection. That's possible. So, just as an opportunity, as an invitation, connecting with your superficial fascia as a way to kind of embrace that aspect of yourself or another. That maternal aspect of all of us, right? Superficial fascia is also protective, right? It's actually strong. So I have some cool videos. Look me up online, Gil Hedley on YouTube or something. And I think there's one, I don't know what it's called, maybe the Berlin Fascia Congress 2018 video. It's really cool. I show superficial fascia without the lipids in it. It was really amazing process to do that, to sort of just work the tissue. Some of my friends helped. And thank you, Juno. Thank you, Christopher. And they squidged and squidged and squidged until they revealed the inner matrix of the fatty layer. And the inner matrix of the fatty layer is like chainmail. It's this biological fabric that's all little circles like chainmail, except it's not chainmail because it's not metal, it's flesh, it's collagen and millions of little and then you see it all by itself, and it's very strong. So this is part of our strength and protection as well. Combine it with the skin, and it's a very protective, strong layer, so that mama can put baby on the hip, right, and it doesn't rip off, right? We don't fall apart because we got one on the hip, and I used to do this. I have one kid on the hip, and I'm peeling an orange for the other kid, and thank goodness my body didn't fall apart. So I always wonder, why do I need this strong layer here? It's stronger than most other tissues in your body. And you would think, but at the surface, we encounter the world, right? So to be embodied in one of these, which I don't mean to think, well, this is exactly what I mean, to say that your consciousness is having a focused awareness in, just look around in one of these, right? What does that, what does that mean? And so how do we keep connecting that more to this layer? What else can I add? It's contractile, right? The superficial fascia, this beautiful yellow fleece, this strong, sensual body covering, this brilliant yellow bit of love in us, is also contractile. It has my facial expressions, which people have noted are really strange. Just an hour ago, someone in this room said, "You're quirky." And I thought, how marvelous. I am a little quirky. And it's partly because there's electroshock therapy in my face when I talk. I don't know why. But that's the action of skeletal muscle tissue on the fat in my face. It's another specialty feature of the superficial fascia, that it's an organ of expression of emotions and speech. My orbicularis oris is not anchored. It's not anchored in any bone. It's anchored in my face fat. And I'm jiggling it around to communicate with you. Isn't that wild? I could be going like, ooh. So I'm not the only species on the planet who communicates with his face fat. We have other cousins on the planet who do the same. But so nourishment, protection, sensuality, resource, expression. I could go on for the whole hour on this. I'm not going to, but I just want to give you the idea that if we can develop aspects of appreciation for that which our culture consistently diminishes, we can step above our culture and transform our culture through embodiment, and through the embrace of the layer rather than the rejection of the layer. Now, another cool feature of superficial fascia is that it moves. Have you ever hung out with a tree Any tree huggers in the audience? Hugging a tree and hugging your lover is very different, right? It's wonderful, but it's different. Okay, you do it for a little bit, not for like 20 minutes, right? Because the tree doesn't, the bark doesn't slide on the trunk. It's fixed. There's no differential movement. But in our human bodies, we have differential movement, which is to say, this can happen. Not just this, that's not necessarily, like a tree branch can blow in the wind, right? But the bark isn't sliding on the trunk. That's a big deal that you might not have thought about. But I've thought about this one a lot. And I'm like, how did nature figure out how to do that? How to have differential movement, because that's the key to us getting up and going, like moving around, spreading ourselves all over the planet. The trees do it by spreading their seed. Well, I spread seed a little bit. I did that too. But you know what I mean. Okay, so watch, just look at this. So there's movement there, right? You can grab your skin and superficial fascia together and go wank, 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 wank. That's kind of a cool property, and you can do it all over your body more or less. Now, the thickness of the superficial fascia and its structure is lobular, right? It's like little lobular sponges in there, all nestled together. And because there's millions of tiny little sponges, they can move relative to each other in there. And so we can have shearing in our fatty layer. That's one kind of movement, and that's really important because that enables us, when you do a heel strike, it enables the wave to go through your body without it feeling jarring, right? So we have a current, a wave current that can go through our whole sleeve of our body that conducts and distributes forces in a general way so that it's not so jarring to move. But also the superficial fascia moves over the deep fascia somehow, right? And that enables us to reach out or to fold up, right? Or to do this kind of thing so that our tissues can move underneath this layer. I don't see this moving so much, but it does. There's movement here in all of our movements. If we didn't have it, believe me, it would be uncomfortable. I have a dear friend who I worked on for years. He had suffered some burn injury, and his skin didn't move the way we would hope it would. And that was uncomfortable and frustrating. And we worked a lot at trying to facilitate movement in a sort of where there was a lot of binding of this layer to the deeper layer. So you don't know you got it till you lose it, right? And when you're missing that level of movement in your body, which you might not appreciate, you think, oh, muscles make me move, right? Well, your muscles ain't going anywhere if everything isn't sliding above them and sliding beneath them and sliding between them. So how does that happen? And I'm going to let that be my segue into layer number 2. So layer number 2 we're going to call Fuzz. All right. So when I started doing dissection, I approached the table and the donor form with preconceived notions, right? Preconceived notions of what is muscle tissue and how is it connected? I don't know. As in my Rolfing training, I heard Ida Rolf said the muscles should move upon one another like silk stockings. What a beautiful image that was. I love that image. But if you have a stocking here and a stocking here and they move against each other, that's really cool. But they're not connected actually, right? So I saw the pictures. Maybe many of you have seen this muscle chart picture. Is there a muscle? Oh, it's right here on the wall. I take it off, but you get the idea. It's like muscle man. And all those muscles there. And they're very cleanly dissected and there's no fascia. It's just a drawing, right? And they chose the red crayon, but they didn't choose the white crayon and they left out all the fascia. So I knew there was fascia in there, but when I came to the muscle tissues, for instance, or between the superficial fascia and the deep fascia, and I pulled it up and put it in tension, it looked like cotton candy. or candy floss, as the all British say. Or we could say cotton batting, you know, like when you're making something with cotton batting, and if you have that, and it's very non-directional stuff, right? It's going in every bitty direction, and it's kind of whitish, and when you pull it, it looks, it's like, ooh, it's all confused. Well, I saw this in the body. Honestly, at the very beginning, I wasn't sure it belonged there. You know, I thought maybe this was adhesion, you know, because the tissues are dry in a fixed body. And I thought when I pull this apart and I see that, and then I put my finger through it and it kind of disappears, I was like, it must be these ephemeral adhesions in the body that I heard about. But after 100 bodies, I was like, no, this stuff belongs there. This is part of the anatomy that just wasn't drawn into the book. How disappointing. You know, it wasn't on my flashcard. It wasn't on the test. It wasn't in the massage exam. It wasn't anywhere. Except in the human body that I'm touching and that I would like to know something about. So how do you deal with that? You just start telling stories, right? You're like, so at first I told stories about it not belonging there, and then I'd make it go away. And then I was like, no, I'm actually dissecting this stuff. It's always there. What am I actually doing? We don't pay attention to what we're doing so much, you know, and here I am doing this thing. I'm pulling the tissue apart. I'm actually putting it in a position that it never was in your life, not once. So I'm actually destroying something. And I was like, oh, I'm destroying something. What am I destroying? What is my action upon the body doing to it? So it turns out that if you put it back down, this thing you pulled apart, if you put it back down, it becomes a membrane. It becomes, and if you work on it in a body that's not fixed, that's more fluid, then you see that it's a wet membrane. It's a wet, translucent membrane, which when it's dried and pulled apart looks like cotton candy, but when you put it back down and together, you can see, oh, this is actually the anatomy of differential movement. This is, without this, there's none of this. We're a tree. If this stuff weren't there, then the skin would be stuck to the, you know, and the superficial fascia would be stuck to the deep fascia, and it couldn't do this. And you couldn't throw that ball or catch it or jump or do anything. So this was an exciting discovery, you know, and then you can investigate the kind of the functions more clearly. But the main function is differential movement. So at what level is what I now call perifascia? Perifascia because it's fascia that goes around other fascia, actually. It's like fascia. It's fascia. So perifascia. So the fuzz, I call it filmy fascia. I've called it fuzz for 10 years. I called it filmy fascia for 13 years. And for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been calling it perifascia so that my anatomy friends can nod and smile rather than smirk and groan. So the perifascia, let me see. If we, you go just like that, I can feel my superficial fascia jiggling. If you have larger breasts than me, it will jiggle even more. Or your butt might be jiggling right now if you do something like this, right? And what's enabling that, right? That is, again, this membranous interface between the fatty layer and the more fibrous, dense layer. But it goes past that because our body is wrapped and then wrapped some more, and then wrapped some more, and then wrapped some more until we can't see it anymore. I study gross anatomy, which is to say big stuff that you can see with your eyes or with your readers on. And yet the plan, the pattern of perifascial wrapping of things that move relative to each other goes all the way in, right? Goes all the way through each muscle, all the way through each, so that pattern, we won't call it perifascia at the cellular level, we'll call it interstitium. Thank you, Neil Teza. We'll call it interstitium or something else. We'll call it anything. We'll call it, endomesium or something, but we'll call it something. But the point is, the function of it is what enables differential movement, even at this level, right? So if I'm holding the ball, and I was so macho when I was in grad school doing Tai Chi, and me and my friends would have like hold the ball offs. We all held our balls, okay? Yeah. So we're all holding our balls here. This is what I mean, okay? We're holding our balls. And it was so macho. We all wanted who could do it the longest, right? So you do this, and you're very steady, but after whatever, 10 minutes, you're starting to be like, and after 20 minutes, you're mentally exhausted. But we did this for an hour, and you're like, after an hour, and you're like, I'm gonna die, right? And you're shaking. And what's happening is that the load is being transferred, right, from one little motor unit to another. And they're so exhausted. It's like, you hold the ball, I can't, I'm tired. You hold the ball, I can't, I'm tired. You hold the ball, I can't, I'm tired. And they keep switching back and forth and passing it off from one little muscular neurovascular pairing to another. But what enables that to be happening, again, is this potential for a contraction here and a rest here, contraction here and a rest here. So we can have all that going on. But this is, so that's on a good day, right? We have differential movement in all of the relationships within our tissues where it's possible for movement. But that's not how we live, folks, right? We live stuck in ourselves a lot. We embody stuckness a lot, right? Rather than the given fluidity, the fluid potential of our form that's inherent to the perifascia, this wet, translucent, beautiful, membranous interface between everything that wants to move relative to each other. So that we use our bodies to sit, stand, turn the doorknob, eat the cereal, right? Pretty simple stuff. Occasionally we do it. And there's some more movement, right? And that's good. That's a lot of fluidity in the body. But the limits on our movement that are placed upon us by social propriety are extreme. And they look different from culture to culture. They look different within a culture based on maybe your religious background or your familial background or the area of the country that you live in, right? But if you I've traveled around the world a little bit, and some of you can spot a whatever coming at you, someone from, when I went to Italy, they're all making out on the park benches. It was like a lot of movement in that culture. It was wonderful. It was unfamiliar. We don't do that so much in the United States. We had Puritans come here and start our country, and it's much more, we're not so touchy-feely as we find some of my ancestors from Italy were, or I was raised Roman Catholic, and there's certain ways you move your pelvis as a Roman Catholic pious boy from New Jersey. That's how it's done. You move like a 2x4, basically, with a bloat in your pants, So you kind of go around like this, and you don't want to move there. You don't want to feel that dynamic movement through your body because that would be untoward. It might lead you down unwelcomed paths. Or the placement of my eyes, was 6 feet in front of me on the ground, right? So I walked like a 2x4 with a load in my pants with my eyes 6 feet on the ground. I'm not saying all folks from this tradition do this, but this is how I read it, right? And so I would kind of walk like this, and I usually do it with a book, even worse, right? So that kind of movement was basically only using a little bit of the slipperiness available to me. So what was happening to the slipperiness that wasn't being used when you move around the world like that? It goes gummy, okay? It goes gummy, which is to say that super hydrated, translucent, beautiful, slippery membrane starts to have fiber cross-linking in it, starts to have hydrogen bonding in it, starts to be like, the top of the Jell-O when it's in the fridge for too long and it gets that weird skin on it that nobody wants to eat. That's what you become. Okay, we get, because this wonderful fluid system starts to kind of lose some of that dynamism. Now, this isn't lost for good. In fact, you can get rid of it with a little bit of cueing and a little bit of movement, this kind, literally. You can, or say you hurt yourself and it's like, I hurt my shoulder, and then you don't use it for weeks or months or a couple of years. I didn't use it for like 3 years and lost more and more function. And then it gets a little gummy in there, a little stuck, right? But we can rehabilitate ourselves. Most of you have had an injury and rehabilitated yourself from it. I've had injuries and rehabilitated myself. So we can lose movement in our slippery layer, and then we can recover it. That's the good news. If it goes really, really far, it can be harder to reclaim movement. So I call that, it goes crystallization. It starts to, when you take onions in a pan with butter, and it's delicious, right? And it caramelizes and all that. Crystals are forming, aromatic crystals are forming in that, and that's why the room smells good and the food tastes good. So if you have crystals forming in your body, then your movement is severely limited, but you taste better. Right? It's choices. It's choices, right? But we can let that stuff go. I stopped moving like that. I took my eyes and I brought them to the horizon, and I welcomed the world into my life, right? And so that you can go forth and embody. And then that slipperiness returns, and, well, you end up getting divorced. Because all that movement can't be fit into that situation anymore. So, anyway, so this is the problem with embodiment sometimes, right? The problem with taking on the potential that's within you and recovering your movement capacity might place you out of situations that you fit yourself into, right? So embodiment can threaten your world a little bit, right? Because if you've been moving along with someone in a certain way, or a certain community even, like embodiment moved me right out of my church. It moved me out of my marriage. It moved me into whole new worlds that are exciting and beautiful, but different, right? As a result of this exploration. Now, what about the deep fascia? So we've got the spongy, beautiful, yellow, shimmering sun covering your body as a golden fleece, enabling your fluid to go through you like that. We have the perifascia that makes you go every which way and enables differential movement potential at the deepest levels of your form. So when I was a rolfer, we were all into deep fascia. That was the strappy one, the famous fascia that you've all seen one picture of, the IT band, like white with stripes going down it, and you're like, woo, fascia. That's it, folks. That's the only one that looks like that in your whole body, right? So there's many different kinds, right? So even in the deep fascial layer. But the basic thing about the deep fascia is it is kind of, we call it dense, regular, fibrous connective tissue. So do picture for a moment in your mind, maybe strapping tape, right? Like that's, it has like those little white strings in it. Have you ever seen that stuff? And it comes in a little roll and you pull it around, and you put it on a box or what have you. So strapping tape, it's not the best analogy in the world for deep fascia, but let's go with it for a moment. So if you have one piece of strapping tape, there's just one layer of it, and it has a bunch of strings in it. Well, you take another piece of strapping tape and put it across. Now you got these ones and these ones, and now you have a grid, right? It's a different biological fabric than one with only one layer. Or you could take a third layer. And now we got like 3 layers of strapping tape. Gosh, that stuff is strong. That's what we have right here, right? And they don't have differential movement relative to each other, those stringy layers. They're embedded in one another. they're stabilizing, actually. They're rooted onto our bones. This deep fascia layer is kind of like an exoskeleton in relationship to our bones. So what would that have to do with movement, right? How do we embody that one? Well, stop smashing on it first, okay? You're like, oh, it's really tight. I'm gonna grind it off or something. It's like, no, it's tight. It's holding it together. That's part of your it's your exoskeleton. You have your skeleton and then the deep fascial exoskeleton of your body. It's a stabilizing layer, and stuff moves relative to it. And in fact, I'm going to use this word, embedded in perifascia. So where there's differential movement relative to it, say right here, for instance, on our arm, this scanned superficial fascia, perifascia, then this strappy layer, this saran wrappy, tight, dense, fibrous layer. You can feel it too. If you give yourself a squeeze and go through that spongy layer, don't do the slippery thing, but go through the slippery thing, and you'll feel there's like something there. There's like, don't dig on it too much, it hurts, right? It's wrapping your muscle tissue as a dense layer, and it bulges. Let's make a muscle. Okay, when you make a muscle, right? How about that? Let's do it again. Okay, so we make a muscle and it bulges. Well, it'll bulge in another couple of years, no one. It bulges, right? And that's because, although in this length of it, it doesn't have so much distensibility, it can go this way. It can go this way. So when you make a muscle of your thigh, right, it goes like that. And that's because the muscle tissues underneath it, contracting it, are sort of forcing that deep fascia into an expanding cylinder, and it's kind of it has a containing effect, but it also has a force conducting effect that's very relevant. So we don't want to be without it, but we don't want to pretend we can move it like we can move perifascia. I think my latest analogy for the dense, regular, fibrous fascia layers. Imagine you're making a Jell-O. I love Jell-O. You got a pan of Jell-O and you have some spaghetti, and you put some of the spaghetti down into the Jell-O, right? All in a row like that. Now put some more Jell-O liquid in there, and put some spaghettis across this way. And just let that Jell-O set. Now, I can, after it's set in a fridge, right, I can come back to that and look at it and like, whoa, there's a spaghetti grid in there. And there's Jell-O above the spaghetti, and there's Jell-O below the spaghetti, and in fact, there's Jell-O through the spaghetti. The Jell-O is the perifascia. The spaghetti is the dense fibrous matrix of what we call the deep fascia. So it's not like there's perifascia above. Although I said this in 46 cities, that there's perifascia above the deep fascia and perifascia below the deep fascia. Actually, what it is that the deep fascia is embedded in perifascia, which is just a different way of thinking about it. But I know it's the case because I looked at it under a microscope finally, and you can just see this stuff. It's really cool. So if I'm got all my superficial fascia, I can contact that, and I can contact my perifascia. Right, all like that. How do I get to my deep fascia? Right, you do this kind of stuff. Right, you ever see people do Singi? It's a martial art. Singi, it goes with Bagua and Tai Chi. Singi, and they kind of get into their tendons and their aponeuroses and the sheets. So they do iron shirt Qigong. It's like, and they fill themselves out in there. Those people are experts at embodying deep fascia, the iron shirt Qigong people, right? If there are any of you out there, feel free to flex for us. But basically, we can come into this thing where we connect to what's stable and steady in us in order to move. You can't move without something to move relative to, right? Movement requires stability and differential potential. We can't do one or the other. Oh my gosh, it's 3:46 in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Questions?
No, I have questions.
Oh, you have questions.
For you.
Ask me a question.
Okay, so Caitlin wants to know.
Hi, Caitlin.
And other people are curious. Can you speak about fascia's relationship to the formation of trigger points and perhaps its release response to applied pressure?
Wow. I don't know. Because trigger points are a phenomenon of the living, okay? No trigger points in cadavers, I'm afraid. So hundreds and hundreds of cadavers later, I've never seen a trigger point because it's a function of the living energy system operating the tissues. Now, that's not to say there's no anchorage in the fascia. I'm certain there must be because it's there and you find them. But if we think of it as like maybe a cloud of congealness in an energy system, which if you palpate it and find it, right, it's not just one layer, it's all the layers are expressing that there. And when you, I don't know, you pet a puddle, if you just dig around in the same spot, no, but if you go through it, you can actually get the energy to move. That's the best I can do for you. Yeah, more questions.
Okay, good. Joyce Lee wants to know.
Hi, Joyce.
What can we do to heal Fuzz? I had a bike injury. All surface wounds and bruising and sprains are healed, but when I kneel, it still hurts, and she's wondering Fuzz needs alignment.
Your injury is happening through all your tissues, and all your tissues have an unbelievably high capacity for healing. So I'm an optimist when it comes to healing stuff in the body. And even if you have scarring and injury and stuff, you can learn how to move around your scars and have your scars become more pliable. Scars are healing properties of our body. But so your injury, is it in a fuzz? Yes. How can you help it? But not just there, right? But so where there's stillness in your injured tissues, you can introduce movement, but only in the most loving way. I never go for the smashy stuff, which is popular enough, and who am I to judge? But you know, it's just not my thing. So I'm into like soft energy work, moving through an energy. You know, when your kid bashes his head on the floor and starts to cry, you're not like, here, let me give you my elbow into that. You know, that's not fun, right? No, when a kid bashes their head on the floor, you hold them, you comfort them, and you let it relax enough that energy can be invited to move through there again, and that the slipperiness can be brought back, etc. So I'm just a fan of treating boo-boos like little kids who need to be picked up, hugged, loved, petted, and believe me, they'll start squirming on their own soon enough. So they're like, put me down, I want to go play. You know, so treat an injury like a little kid.
Okay, Andrea, and there's been a request to repeat. This is a long question, so I'll put it in the chat, but maybe repeat the key points. Why is there a need to differentiate between layers of fascia? Fascia is ubiquitous, and there's no disconnection between the superficial and deeper layers, so why is there a need for different names for the same thing? Seems that invites an old division of view.
Okay, so here's the thing.
Repeat the question.
Why bother with all these words for fascia when it's one big connecty thing? And I hope I paraphrase that adequately. And I'll say, because perceiving difference and appreciating differences in texture, property, function, and physiology does not impute separation. That's a function of the mind. The body reveals itself as one. That's the most profound thing I've learned from the body. One body, many textures, differential movement without separation. But if we want to understand in depth the textures that we encounter in the human form and how they don't all have the same movement. Bone doesn't have the same movement properties as my tongue, right? So it's okay to inquire into the differences within the whole. And the fact that I can notice the difference between me and my neighbor doesn't separate me from my neighbor, right? My capacity to perceive difference when it's a function of the heart does not separate me or my body from myself or my neighbor. Actually, it lends me to appreciate and explore more deeply into the human form that I'm seeking to embrace rather than alienating me from it.
Your next question is from Cindy.
Hi, Cindy.
So scar tissue adheres to fascial layers. Addressing the underlying scar tissue, will it also release those crystals? depending on how old the scar has been hanging around. Will it release and not re-adhere? So basically what happens when you deal with scar tissue.
If you slam on tissue too much, yeah, repeat the question. If stuff is stuck, can it?
Scar tissue.
You repeat the question.
Yeah, so scar tissue adheres to fascial layers.
Yeah.
Addressing the underlying scar tissue, will that also release those crystals?
Okay, well, addressing scar tissue release crystals. Crystals are kind of, I don't know, Robert Schleip tells me they're there for good and you ain't getting rid of them. But the thing is, that doesn't mean you can't facilitate slipperiness everywhere around them, right? So that you can recover movement, even if you have some gunk in you. Like, don't worry about the little gunk. We all have gunk. I haven't found a cadaver that didn't have some gunk in it. We all have bumps and weirdnesses and all that stuff. It's all good. So, and that includes some crystals, some scar tissue, not going to hurt you. But you can, my emphasis for scar tissue is always first, thank that scar. It's holding you together. It's part of the healing process that you can be grateful for because you might be dead otherwise. So thank the scar and then invite movement and pliability around it, nearby it, in its neighborhood, so that the movement starts to act on the scar rather than you just like trying to rip it apart, which is going to cause more adhesions. Right? So you don't want to generate inflammation with your treatment, in my opinion, when there might be alternatives that are more gentle, that are inviting fluidity in the area. And then, yeah, you're going to wash stuff out. It's a good thing.
Both Anne and Rosanna had the same question. Is the silver skin on meat fascia?
Yes.
Repeat the question.
Is the silver skin on meat fascia? Yes. Yeah, that would be dense, regular, fibrous fascia. But when you're pulling that chicken apart and you see the fuzzy stuff, that's perifascia, right? And when you see the fat, that's superficial fascia. When you take the skin of a chicken off, it comes off with the fat, and then there's a membranous film that you bust up, and then what's left is the dense regular on top of the meat. Yeah. Chicken is great for studying anatomy if you don't have a cadaver.
Dan wants to know, in body work like Rolfing, focusing on fascia, emotional releases are attributed to working with fascia. What are your ideas on the emotional qualities of fascia? Are they a storehouse for emotions?
What are my ideas on the emotional qualities of fascia? Are they a storehouse for emotion? I have a lot of ideas on that, actually. Let's do another hour. Because what I've noticed when we're dissecting fascia is the emotional milieu in the room that it creates. That's different from one textural layer to another. Yeah, layers actually, when you get into that texture, when you get into superficial fascia, it generates a very different feeling in the room than when you're working with deep fascia. People cry over superficial fascia. Nobody cries over deep fascia, and nobody even sees the perifascia. I got to point it out to them because it's nearly invisible, but incredibly profound. So when you're working on these tissues and you're inviting movement where movement has been resisted, right? When you're literally bringing slipperiness to areas that have been stilled by a person's choices, not only by the things that they've experienced in terms of injury and pain or whatever, but by the entire frame of their social matrix, right? When you tinker with that, when you fiddle around in there, and when you move for them through touch, right, and dissolve, some of those held spaces, that's a moment in that person's life where they can be like, oh my gosh, I can be there. I can, your consciousness is invited to that place and that movement, and you can either live with it or reject it, right? And don't shame someone if they come back the next week looking like they did before you worked on the week before, because they might have gone home and it didn't fit, right? And it is a big release, but they might not be able to move with that in their life. Give them time to integrate not only in their body but in their world. Right? Because if all of a sudden Gil comes to church like this, it's like, who is that guy? What happened to my altar boy? So yeah, it's incredibly, working with these different layers and their movement properties are going to restore and change the movement experience of the person. And we're going to see a big change.
I think this is the last question we have time for.
Last question.
How to massage fascias? How to massage fascia.
How to massage fascia. How to massage fascia. Again, And again, this is partly why I'm saying know the textures and their qualities, know your relationship to that texture, and know maybe that will enable you to invite a person past their relationship with that texture. Because if someone's on your table and they hate superficial fascia, they hate their fatty layer, they hate themselves when they look in the mirror, and you have aspects of appreciation so that when you put your hands on that and you touch them in a loving way, and your touch expresses love for that layer in yourself embodied and in them as you touch them, believe me, they will have a shift. And if you are going to connect with someone's perifascia, right, and introduce slipperiness into a place where someone has been gummy, go there first yourself. Know that you have that within you so that you can co-vibrate. My friends in the room were saying, what's with the tuning forks, right? Your superficial fascia, my superficial fascia, right? We're going to co-vibrate together in that texture. And that's another reason why I emphasize these textural layers so much, because the vibrational communication, what do we call it? The emission and absorption spectra of the chemistry of different textures in your body are not the same. So the superficial fascia is resonating with your superficial fascia, and my perifascia is resonating with your perifascia. My deep fascia is resonating with your deep fascia, because they're literally different notes in the symphony of the human body, which is one song, right? So how to massage it? Connect to yourself. Know that each layer has its own distinct personality, characteristic, emission and absorption spectra, vibrational pattern, and relationship, right, to that person. Like, what, do they love it or do they hate it, or do they not even know it's there? Depending on the answer to those questions, meet them where they are and take them to themselves.
Excellent. Thank you, Gil.
Is that it? Did we do it?
I think that's it. I think we did it. Ladies and gentlemen, now.
Awesome. We did it.
Right, well, Shea, if you like that, you'll probably like embodimentunlimited.com and our app. So on both of these things, you can get a bunch of podcasts that aren't available here, some exclusive ones with some big names, some people you'll probably recognize that are over there. There's a copy of my book, PDF, my first book on embodiment, which seems that people like. We sold quite a few copies on Amazon, but there's a free copy there. What else is there? Loads of videos of me coaching embodiment, resources on trauma, on meditation, on yoga. And you can also chat to people without going on Facebook or any of that nonsense. So if you want to chat embodiment with people, that's there. And it's on the embodimentunlimited.com, all free, and the app available at the App Store and all that good stuff. So if you like this, do check those out.